Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to Autism Rep in the Writing Industry. I am the moderator for this panel, Basil, and my pronouns are they, them. And with us today are our wonderful panelists. We have Ace Tilton Ratcliff, who is a disabled, non-binary, multidisciplinary artist whose work grapples with the discovery of self through difficult life experiences that make for bad chit-chat, but damn good art. We have Dr. Lara Ameen, who is a screenwriter, novelist, short fiction writer, sensitivity, authenticity reader, and holds a PhD in education with a disability studies emphasis from Chapman University. And last but certainly not least, we have Cait Gordon, who is an autistic, disabled, queer Canadian writer of speculative fiction celebrating diverse body minds. And I am just so thrilled to once again be moderating an autism panel. Uh, Always tons of fun, so much fun. So we'll just go ahead, jump right in and get started with, let's see, what would be a good starter? Let's just start with the simplest question, which is, what constitutes good autism representation?
I like that you said good starter, not easy starter. I'll chime in here. I think that one of the most important parts of good representation for autism, but as a general rule, has to do with making sure that if the representation is not being done by somebody from the community, that it is informed by the community through interviews or discussions or talks. So if you're not directly autistic, you should definitely be interacting with us to know how to talk about us.
Yeah, I would also say like anything that's written or made by autistic people. And not, I mean, this will probably get into another question too, but like, don't prioritize like non-autistic voices or like parents of, autistic kids if they're not autistic. So, like, just prioritize the voices that like are autistic, are disabled, have, that lived experience and that representation, and talk to them and interview them and make sure they're part of, make sure they have a seat at the table, so to speak, but like in all facets of like a production or uh media, or not just like books, but like anything that can they can possibly be involved in, because like it's not good enough to just be like, oh yeah, they helped that one time for that one facet of the representation. So it gets a stamp of approval of representation because they helped once, but like they didn't help through the entire project or entire process. And I think that's especially important, not just in publishing, but also like in film and television, and in like, consulting with like different forms of, I don't even want to say media representation, but just for organizations and things like that, because so many times the non-disabled people or non-autistic people get prioritized instead. So just making sure there's like an equal amount of those autistic voices and autistic voices of color and queer autistic voices and multiply disabled autistic voices also being considered. I think that's what would make good representation, or more authentic representation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what's been said. For me, diversity is reality. I mean, for all of us, really, diversity is reality. Good representation, or the representation that I like to see, is diverse by age, gender, race, sexual orientation, and also personality. There's not just one, there's not an autism personality, you know we there, and there's so much diversity within neurodiversity. And I guess I'm a humor author, and I love when there's autistic representation that's funny. You know, I like to say autism isn't a superpower, but snark is. And I just get thrilled to bits when I see snark in an autistic character, particularly written by an autistic author.
Yeah, I really love that. I think that it applies everywhere when we're talking about disability, but especially about autism. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I know that that's so common for us, but I think that so many other people are not as familiar with that concept, and so many of us have completely different life experiences. I didn't get my diagnosis until I'm not even at a year since having officially joined the community, despite knew the fact that it was who I was for a really long time. And as I creep up towards 40, it's really reassuring to see representations that have my life experience of coming to a diagnosis late and of getting older, because I think so frequently we do get that trope of the autist who is younger, frequently a teenager, very frequently white, very frequently mask, very frequently obsessed with trains, and that's just not the reality for so many of us.
Okay, those were all some excellent answers. And one of the things I always struggle with when I moderate these panels is like, I'm technically not a panelist. I've been on panels, but it's like you don't really answer the questions, but I'm like, oh, I have some ideas too. I've seen some good autism representation and I've seen some bad representation, which leads us into our next question, which is, have you seen examples of bad representation? And, if you don't feel comfortable stating the media, exactly, you can describe it or just talk in general terms. That's perfectly fine. I mean, I'm just gonna dip in here real fast and say that one, The Good Doctor, that I have not watched it. I have seen clips of it, and that's enough. Sometimes that's enough media for one day. It's time to go watch She-Ra again and stare at Entrapta instead. So with that, have you seen examples of bad representation? I will open it up to our actual panelists.
Oh, that's such a good one. Sia, is that how you say the musician's name? That disaster of a movie that she put out. I know she's probably been dragged enough between between here and there and back again, but oh, that one was so bad. And even worse because there was such an excuse about the call coming from inside the house to walk it back after the fact.
Yeah, I was also gonna say The Good Doctor. I'm just like, that's just terrible. And I've never even seen like whole things of it. I've also seen like clips of it, and I'm like, and especially as someone who did study like disability rep and TV and film, like that was my whole PhD. And I was just like, that's what I was studying for my PhD. And I'm just like, if you're saying, and I didn't even know like that I didn't have an autism diagnosis for most of my PhD, and I think for all of it. But I was thinking, if that's what you consider to be good representation, then the bar for good representation is so low. If that's what's considered good, you know, autistic standards and by even some autistic people, because there isn't enough authentic rep, that's just considered good rep, and it's not. Other things I would just say that are more in general is like bad representation is like when non-disabled, non-autistic parents posts their kids' meltdowns on social media. I think it's terrible because like you're invading your child's privacy. Like they're gonna grow up and be like, why did my parent post that on the internet? So I think that's a classic example of like bad representation. And also this is comes in more in general with disability representation in general, but like any feel good media piece or that like ends up in the newspaper or on social media that's like, oh, the non-disabled prom king took the, disabled autistic prom queen to prom, or something like that, where it's like exalting the non-disabled person for taking the disabled person, especially the autistic person, to prom or some kind of like feel good, event like that. I know they have stuff like that for older adults as well. Just like any feel good piece that's not actually feel good and that's more like inspiration porn, I think would be a bad example of representation. And anything that shows autistic people as like in a meltdown or having meltdowns that's not done like in a way that's respectful of them too, that just like invades their privacy, not just the news articles, but like just like the just showing that in media in general when it's not when it's an invasion of their privacy and not showing, oh, this is what a meltdown actually looks like in a more like in a way that's okay, that the autistic person's okay with, okay with that being posted or whatever.
I think about that point about posting your child's teens meltdowns without their consent. And the first thing, whenever I see things like that, I was like, how would you like if someone took you at the worst moment of your day and splattered that everywhere? Like, that's just supremely not okay. And as for bad rep, well, I'm 55 years old, which means I'm Gen X. So there was no autism diagnosis as a child for me. And in a way, I feel relieved for that, because I think even back in the 70s, they were putting autistic kids like in institutions. So thank you to my neurodivergent parents who just thought I was interesting. And the first autistic representation that I saw in the media was Rain Man. And I don't know whether it's good or bad representation. It's a portrayal. But I find that in my generation, it became almost like the standard of what autism looks like, so and I think for much of my life, I didn't know I was autistic because it was always supposed to be a white male savant. I'm sure there's a lot of white male savants out there in autistic land, but there's so many ways of being autistic. Now, in terms of the good doctor, it's unanimous. I haven't watched the entire episode either, because I would find myself screaming at every commercial that I saw. It just felt so ick and so inauthentic. So no, I haven't watched it either, but I will stand by the fact that I don't want to watch it, and I'm sure it really is ick. Maybe it helps some people, I don't know, but not me. So yeah, so to me, like anything that fuels those harmful tropes, that in turn spawns us as being a person to grieve over. Oh, you have to grieve over the fact that your offspring is autistic. Or even worse, what we're seeing now, which is, oh, we need to find cures for autism. Could you just not? Accommodations, accessibility, that would be nice. Let's do that instead. So I just want to say the problem with bad representation is you can't just say, oh, it's just a movie. Oh, it's just a book. Fiction often fuels our perception of reality. So it does matter that we have healthy, authentic portrayal of autistic representation in media.
I know a lot of people love him, but The Big Bang Theory, I think, has done just irreparable damage in so many ways. And much like The Good Doctor is one of those things where I simply absolutely cannot. It speaks to those tropes, and it's so much about painting us as a very specific type, painting us as having to have a superpower, or painting us as having no ability whatsoever to exist in the world. We might exist in the world differently, I think, but regardless of where you fall on the spectrum of being autistic, you can exist in the world. Just period, full stop on the end of that.
I forgot about the Big Bang Theory because my parents actually love watching it, and they'll watch it like every week. My dad will, turn it on, and we'll have dinner and we'll watch it. And I sit there like watching it with them because it's what's on and it's better than the news, honestly. Even though I don't like the show, it's better than watching the news. But like I'm like, if this is just not good representation, like it just feels gross. Like it feels exploitative, and it feels like wrong in some way. Like I know Community and The Big Bang Theory often get compared, like both shows get compared. But as a Community fan, I love Community and I love the Abed character, and Abed is wonderful. Do not come for him. He is precious. And Jeff and Britta are precious, and they're all precious except for maybe Pierce. Old white guy. But like I remember just like doing a lot of like research between like Big Bang Theory and Community because I was helping my friend of mine like type her dissertation, and she was doing it on comedy and disability, and there were articles that came up about the autism representation in Big Bang Theory, and I'm just like like it just feels gross. And I'm like, if that's people's, it's either the idea that autistic people like can't do anything and they're helpless, or like they're really, really smart, but they're super awkward, but it's like done in like a weird way that's almost obnoxious. And it's just, yeah, it just doesn't quite gel right with me. That specific like representation seems kind of strange, but yeah.
It makes me think of that study about how, gosh, I want to get this right. The neurotypical people were shown pictures or video of autistic people and were able to identify between the autistic and the non-autistic people, and consistently would rate the autistic people on a negative scale. Which is fascinating to me because it means that almost instantaneously neurotypical people can tell that we are different, and that bugs them in some way at a very fundamental level, which I'm sure that y'all have dealt with the bullying that can come along and how subtle that can be. And to me, the Big Bang Theory feels like that very subtle type of bullying, whereas Community, I think, feels like there's an understanding of being neuroatypical that is just not given grace or kindness in the way that Community does.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we've all, not just the people on this panel, but the people listening to this later, hello. I think most of us have probably experienced that core memory of going up to a group of people as like a small child, saying hello, and then the immediate like rejection or just being called weird or ignored. Like, it's like, yeah, it's the autism starter pack, the the part that you don't want, where it's like, you're weird, but we won't ever explain how you're weird, just that you are and that you should fix it. Oh, but yeah, just um
Too
bad representation is just bad representation. And circling back to what Lara was saying earlier about filming kids when they're having meltdowns. I know sometimes it's like, oh, this person's crashing out. Sometimes a crash out is a crash out, but sometimes a crash out is a meltdown, you know? And, you know, just like the difference, that's the other thing too, is like meltdowns, just in general, and autistic people present differently, but also like culturally, a meltdown can look different. You could be very quiet, you could start crying, you could be like some members of my dad's side of the family where they just start yelling and excessive cursing. But that what that would look like if someone filmed that and put that on like TikTok, it was just like, oh, Unk's crashing out. It's like, no, Unk is having a meltdown because the sandwich that he ate had a texture he didn't like, and that's all that is in the house, and he's tired and he's overstimulated, and now he's quote unquote crashing out. Like, no, he's just having a meltdown, and he'll be fine in a bit. Just let him go off in the room. But yeah, just keeping that in mind too, and just in like a general sense, it's also interesting the ways culturally that like meltdowns present, and just autistic like traits and behaviors, and what presents more often versus what's less frequently seen. Um, but since we are talking about media, uh, for y'all three, what do you feel are some common misconceptions about autism in books or in the industry? And I suppose in this case, we could take industry to mean, the publishing industry as a whole. We could talk about media. We could talk about, um, you know, shows, both animated and not, video games. Though I will say, though I do play video games, I honestly can maybe only think of like two games maybe where someone was confirmed autistic instead of just being claimed by the community. But it's a wide arena of media that we can discuss.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, I have a couple of bullet points because this is what kind of came to me about it. I mentioned the thing about, the misconception that we're all savants. If you're not a savant, you can't possibly be autistic, that we lack empathy, that we're a tragedy. Oh, and that we need neurotypical people to save us, and they can save us with their love or some stuff like that. Cure narratives, and that we present with only one set of traits. I don't know how many times people will say, well, you look people in the eyes, you can't be autistic. It's like, one, I have auditory processing disorder. I'm actually looking at your mouth when you speak. So I'm compensating by lip reading. And, when you get screamed at, look at me when I'm talking to you like 100 billion times, you just go, fine, I'm just going to look at you. Won't be able to understand what you're saying because I need to look at my teleprompter that only I can see to process all the words that you're saying. But, and that if someone is non-speaking and non-verbal, I feel there's a misconception that they cannot communicate. They just don't communicate in the way you expect them to. So those are the things that I not only see in bad writing, but also just in attitudes, like just being in publishing circles and writing circles. You will see that. I'm working on a book. It's a humorous romance space opera, and I remember just saying how she's going to be 50 something, she's going to be autistic. And somebody responded to me with, oh, that's good because they need to be loved too. And I'm kind of like staring at you in my almost 34 years of marriage, but okay. Right. So, we can have just as much varied lives as people who are neurotypical. So I think that's this misconception that we're not just, that were the things that I listed, and I talk too much now, so I'm going to say bye.
I think that one about communication is, as so much of this discussion expands out to the entire umbrella of the disability community. So frequently we have people who are autistic or are just disabled in one way or another who don't communicate in that same way, who deal with selective mutism, or who, I have a lot of friends with like CP who, like, for humans who don't hang out with people who have CP, they can be very difficult to understand. And there was just a reel the other day on my Instagram, and all of the questions were just so infantilizing of this person who was communicating very clearly. But, if that's not the way that you exist in the world, surrounded by other disabled people, I think the one about love is really good. And I think, just to keep this PG, but I think that there is an important, we're so frequently neutered in terms of or desexed or removed of any sexuality whatsoever. And of course, again, we're under the umbrella of the whole spectrum of ace, aro, romantic, non-romantic, but I think that frequently autism can go into that bracket of that just doesn't exist. No one can ever love you that way, and you can never feel the depth of those feelings. And I think that I would actually argue the opposite of that. I think that in many ways, autism is about feeling extremely deeply, and not about not feeling at all. And oh, there was one more that you brought up that was so good that I wanted to reiterate. Now it's gone. It's gone. It'll come back as soon as we get off the panel.
I hate when that happens. I really do. It's like the worst feeling. I'm glad that you brought up cerebral palsy, because I do have cerebral palsy, and as many people here, which I'm very glad about, that I was also late diagnosed. I was diagnosed last year. And I think that like there's a lot of commonalities between like with cerebral palsy and autism, and I didn't know that. Like people and people were telling me, even people who weren't autistic, like, oh yeah, there is some commonalities between like cerebral palsy and autism, and then that leads to, you know, more misconceptions. And I think one of the misconceptions, especially like it's in publishing too, when you give non-disabled and non-autistic people, you know, book deals and stuff over autistic voices or disabled voices. But I think especially in the entertainment industry, as someone who's been trying to break in for many years into TV writing, like you look at, you know, actors and writers and stuff, and they'll say, oh, like the misconception is like, oh, if you're disabled or if you're autistic, they can't act, or that role's not going to go towards an autistic actor or a disabled actor. And I really wanted to break that mold. So for my dissertation, my main character, one of my main characters, she's kind of autistic coded, to be honest, but she's not explicitly written as autistic, but she does have CP, she does have cerebral palsy, and it was really important to me, because I wanted to do like a staged reading of my dissertation, the script that I wrote, that I adapted into a novel, to have a disabled actor as like that main character. And I fought for it, because I was invited to like present part of it before I did my dissertation defense. Like I was invited to, you know, do an excerpt of it like the year before with an organization, and I'm like, you're not putting this on Zoom unless you can find me a disabled actor to do it. And they did find me someone with CP, and we're friends now. Her name is Miracle Pelayo. She's wonderful. She's very, very talented actress with cerebral palsy. She's not autistic, but you know, she knows autistic actors, and she posts about different disability stuff in the media on her social media. But it was just very important to me that like, oh, I need to find someone that represents, you know, this disability, you know, with my own, like that was important. And I think that, you know, also going forward, that if I'm going to be writing like an autistic character or something, and if it's going to be in a script, I do want to find like an autistic actor. And the misconception is that, oh, the roles aren't there for them, or that it's not possible for them to work, and it is. It's just like Kat said, you need to have accommodations for autistic and disabled people. You need to have those accommodations in place. Ask us, you know, what we need, what our sensory needs are, what, you know, what can be accommodated in our environments with different things, and have that be part of the norm on sets and in publishing companies, and have editors who are disabled acquire books and all that. And like um it's not the norm, and that's why it becomes a misconception, and, you know, stereotype and all those things, is because it's not the norm, and it should be. And that's why there are less than there are 95% of disabled roles go to non-disabled actors, and then less than 1% of disabled writers are in the writers' room per the stats of Writers Guild of America. in TV writing rooms, and there are programs for like disabled screenwriters and stuff like that. Like there are mentorships for publishing. However, they are very competitive, and you know, if you're not like other misconceptions, if you're saying like, oh, like for me, I can't drive because of my not only because of my autism, because I have a an invisible disability called hyperacusis, which is common with autism and cerebral palsy, and I can't drive, and that's a big like thing of where you if you can't drive, I can't get industry experience in the entertainment industry, and then like I can't get a job in a writer's room because they want people with industry experience, and like that becomes a problem. So like you're getting less and less disabled people in these creative spaces because there are so many barriers and there's so much ableism. That was long-winded, but you get the idea.
I think that there's such a misunderstanding by non-disabled and neurotypical people that a need for accessibility is an inherent set of limitations, instead of looking at it as a way to possibly make the world more accessible. It's, as we all talk about, it's the curb cut effect, to make the world more accessible for the people who may come after. And I think particularly when we're talking about media or the entertainment industry, or so many people who do succeed may not have an official diagnosis, but a lot of us do end up being autistic or do end up being neuroatypical, or I mean 100% of us, just by nature of how the human body works, are going to end up being disabled at one point or another. So it's just so infuriating that there's a closed door for so much of this conversation, when if you opened that door more frequently, it would allow more people to get through and into the room. um yeah, it's very frustrating.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know this panel is not about talking about, the entertainment industry writ large in writers' rooms, but the other problem is they don't pay them enough. So, sometimes you'll work and you sometimes you work on things and they don't ever see the light of day, which I'm not like officially like, like an actor in the Writers Guild or anything, but I follow a lot of people and I've heard some things where even if you writ some things because it never came out, it doesn't count as experience, but they still basically get to use your brain. And that's messed up. It's not cool. And it's just it's another barrier of entry. And like Lara was saying about, I don't drive either for numerous reasons. One, I just don't like to. Two, I have physical disabilities where I probably shouldn't be driving anyway. It just causes too much fatigue. But various reasons, and that does cut down on a lot of opportunities because sometimes there's cool workshops that you could go to, but they want you to like fly out there, or then they want you to either find your own housing or you have to drive from like the location to somewhere else. And it's like, and they're like, we don't have enough money to afford, housing, or they can't afford to like bus you to the place. There's a lot of barriers, which then makes the pool get smaller and smaller. And it's just, you know, if billionaires spent their money the way they should be spending their money instead of trying to escape to Mars, that's a different panel, maybe. But
Well, and again, not the entertainment industry, but when you start talking about, the writing industry is very cliquey in a lot of ways, and it's very much about being in the right places, meeting the right people in person, being able to do the bar cons after the fact, and that's not a thing that so many of us can do for a number of reasons, whether that be about financial access, because we know the stats about disability and finances, or whether that be about being able to do things like actually fly or travel to get to these places, whether it's about being able to do a 3 or a 5 day long panel, which unto itself is absolutely exhausting. There are so many ways that we are excluded from that whole process, that then leads us to a lack of true representation on all levels of media representation.
absolutely. Absolutely. I went to a convention once for, I'm more of the tabletop industry, but I went to a convention in California. Nice time. Got a scholarship. It was great. I did a bunch of volunteering. I was on a bunch of panels. By the end of it, I was exhausted for like 2 weeks, but I had to immediately go back to work. And I'm still feeling the repercussions of that. And that was like last year. So just keeping all of that in mind is just, it's so difficult. Um, but let's continue on to the next question, because I know we could definitely just sit here and talk about barriers and ways to possibly fix the barriers and just, oh, accessibility. I love accessibility. I did some focus in grad school about universal design. It's one of my favorite things. But so for our next question, as with most forms of representation, we know not everyone experiences things in the same way. So how do we avoid excluding certain presentations of autism? And I know we touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about selective mutism and, you know, high support needs, low support needs, high access, low access. Um, you know, also talking about how there's been, you know, the sort of stereotypical like template of the autistic character in media. But how do we avoid excluding the other presentations that maybe we don't see as often, or maybe industry is just afraid to talk about? Because I do feel to some degree there probably are some presentations of the less, I don't want to like make it a thing, but like the less glamorized version, the less idealized version of autism, you know, not like Kat was saying, not everyone is just a savant. Sometimes you know, I make chicken noises when I'm bored. And I've trained myself not to just do that in public unless I'm at an anime convention. But, you know, I could easily just spend all day walking around making clucking noises. So how do we how do we avoid excluding certain presentations?
Thank you so much. The first thing I had on my notes in answering this question was engagement. You know, the internet is a big place. You know, look for reels, videos done by people with lived experiences, right? From all kinds of demographics, right? So fun fact, I'm kind of addicted to these reels on Facebook. It's Torin Wolf and his mom. And Torin is, I use the nickname ADHD, so autistic with ADHD. And so is his mom. And they do these videos together and show like how Torin can be more kind of out with his traits, and his mom is someone who's had to mask all her life, and so it's not just a mom filming a teenager discussing his traits. He also interviews her, you know, to talk about why she feels the need to mask and stuff like that. So I find that was interesting. You know, it's intergenerational and you know, different gender. So I thought that was fantastic. But seek out autistic-led organizations for resources. Like if you don't know where to begin, a lot of times these organizations will point you to blogs, to people, to other resources. You know, you could always put a call out. You know, this is my thing about the whole SIA thing, right? All you have to do is put a call out on social media, and you'll get like about 100 bazillion autistic people saying, hey, I can help you with that. I couldn't believe in the whole, was it 3 years or something she was claiming that research was being done, and for the rep to turn out like that badly, it's like, my gosh, within 24 hours, she could have had help there, in my opinion. Also, take feedback seriously, even if you're autistic yourself, right? I'm autistic in the way that Cait Gordon is autistic, but I'm not going to be autistic like every single person on earth is autistic. So you can't really say, well, I'm autistic, so I know about autism. Nope, that's not how the force works. So, so this is my opinion. It might be a hot take, I don't know. But if you don't want to put in the work, then just leave us out of your stories. Better for there to be no representation than harmful representation.
I think just again, really re-emphasizing we're out here. We exist. We'll answer the questions. And so many of us will answer the questions for free. You know, we might be paid sensitivity consultants, but we are happy. If it means that we will get good representation, my God, we will have the conversation with you. Up, down, in, out, anytime, anywhere. I can promise you, you will find somebody who will answer that question for you. And that's so important. I think that anybody who has any say whatsoever in this would re-emphasize that. It's the most important thing. And I know that, you know, this is sort of bouncing off of what you were just saying, Kat, but when I decided to go get an official diagnosis, I knew that if I went to somebody who was not familiar with the different ways that autism can present when you are older, when you've been masking your whole life, when you are genderqueer, that I was not going to get my diagnosis from somebody who was not familiar with the different ways that autism can be. And so I made sure that I went, and I had to pinch my pennies for several years so that I could go out of network, so that I could go see a doctor who was also autistic and had an autistic son, so that I could get my diagnosis properly, because I knew I wasn't going to get my diagnosis otherwise. And so all of that, I think, to say, you know, when you tell a story, you're telling one story. And I think that in that one story, you can't tell everybody's story. That's just, you end up with messy representation that way. So I think when you are telling whatever story you have decided to tell, make sure that you're doing that job well. Make sure that you're taking the time and putting that effort in. Make sure that you are just do the work well or don't do the work at all. I think I agree wholeheartedly with that. I would rather have exceptional representation of one version of autism than crap representation that tries to put too many pieces in too many places. But also, if your idea of autism is somebody who, you know, looks like me in terms of being, you know, high functioning or whatever other terms people want to use, maybe you should go do some research. Maybe you should go see what autism looks like when we aren't masking hard for an interview. Make sure that you are including all of the parts of autism when you're telling these stories. I think is really important, because the chicken noises exist, and we all have some version of the chicken noise.
Yeah, I think that, like, also prioritizing people who have higher support needs and communicate differently, and who are non-speaking but can communicate in other ways. You know, just prioritizing those voices, not just like in the media, but like communicating with those people. I also remember, speaking of an example, I follow like a TikTok and YouTube account of a person, I believe they go by Corn, and they talk about like how they're low support needs, but they always emphasize like how I learned a lot about like autism representation from their account and from them, because they always talk about how to prioritize people with higher support needs and people who, you know, are people of color, and how autistic people of color are, you know, disproportionately uh you know, marginalized and more taken advantage of. And I'm a person of color myself, but like it's taken some time for me to like come to terms with like these different kind of facets of my identity, and looking at like, oh, you know, there are people who have, you know, other support needs than I do, and other, you know, needs that I don't have, but it doesn't mean that, you know, their voices are unimportant. So just seeking those out, and, you know, if you are doing, you know, sensitivity reading or consulting, just knowing that that one perspective is just one perspective, and we're doing the best that we can, but it's still just one perspective, and it doesn't represent every single perspective on disability or, you know, autism, you know, anyway. So
I think the last thing I would say is that we are very frequently very good at putting on a face to do something like this, but that does not mean that you know all of the support that we might need in the background or once we've closed the computer. And I think that particularly when you are femme presenting to the world, there's a whole different level of masking that has been inculcated in us, that in some ways I'm glad that I did not have a diagnosis. I'm a little bit younger than Kat. So I would have probably just ended up in the gifted classes and not in an institution because that's how it was in the 90s. Um, but I missed out on a lot of support because it just wasn't something that anybody could even visualize me needing. And I think that even now that can really be something that holds us back from asking for things that we need, or even from the way the representation is given in these portrayals of media. You know, there's an idea of who we are when we mask and then who we are when we are fully unmasked. And those are often very different humans.
Sorry, I have a fan on because I'm having a hot flash. Let me just turn my fan off. You can keep that in. That's okay. That's part of life. One thing to say too, to add is self-discovery and self-diagnosis is valid. You know, this is not attention-seeking behavior. This is self-defining behavior. It's like, oh, I understand I'm autistic. I feel like I've been given the keys to my entire life, you know? So I'm always happy for those who are able to get validated by diagnosis, but we have to also remember our siblings in this world who don't have a formal diagnosis, but who are most validly autistic as well.
And they might not want a formal diagnosis. I think that that's completely reasonable. I think that everybody comes to that journey differently. You know, I sat on the knowledge for almost 6 years before I decided to go get a formal diagnosis. And that was a huge back and forth, especially in this day and age where there's so much conversation about fixing us. There's so much that sounds like the 20s and the 30s. I think it's that not having a formal diagnosis is an extremely valid thing, and in probably a lot of ways a safer thing at this point.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend about that who was talking to me about possible autism diagnosis. I was like, well, I mean, you could go get one, but I mean, self-diagnosis is valid, and that's where a lot of us start, right? It's where I started too. And for me, my process was a little weird in that when I look at my evaluation, my neuropsych eval, like, and they, got the ADHD part or whatever. But when I got the autism diagnosis, like, it's not really written anywhere. Like, the person who looked at my eval was like, "Oh yeah, like they totally missed that. Like, you clearly have the signs of like autism, but they when they did their evaluation a couple years ago, and I just got an ADHD diagnosis like 2021." But like when they did that evaluation, like they totally missed like the signs that you're like presenting right now. But she didn't like officially like write it down, but she verbally told me, "Oh yeah, like you're autistic," and clearly like you're still like I was like rocking back and forth and like got all excited and stimmy and like, but like she's like clearly like you have the signs of it, but like it just wasn't diagnosed properly. And that's another thing too, with also going with what Ace was saying is like, who do you go to, even get the diagnosis? Because if you go to somebody who, might not diagnose you well or might not understand what you're looking for or diagnose you with something else. And I'm not saying that's not valid because a lot of autistic people have chronic illness or other disabilities to go along with it. So maybe they're not necessarily misdiagnosed, but maybe the autism gets missed in favor of other diagnoses, which is what happened to me because people were looking at my cerebral palsy my whole life and they didn't look at ADHD and autism because they're like, oh, that's just part of your CP. Like that's, I'm like, no, it's not. But like I had that experience growing up of like, oh, these certain things that were clearly that I see now as, ADHD and autistic traits, or they were just like, oh, that's your CP or that's something else. And it wasn't, it was clearly this, but like it just wasn't diagnosed because I'm female presenting and ADHD and autism, the way people saw that in the 90s and 80s and earlier was like when it's presented in female presenting people, like it presents differently, right? So it's not going to get diagnosed or it's going to get misdiagnosed because in boys it presents differently than in girls. So it's going to be looked at differently and we're not going to get that kind of diagnosis, or it's just going to be totally skipped, or they're just going to be like, oh, they're really gifted or whatever, or something. And I think that's like part of the problem too. It's like it's kind of like a double-edged sword. It's like, oh, if I get a diagnosis, like I might feel better personally, but if I get a diagnosis, will it be used against me like in other ways? So it's like this whole, it ends up becoming this whole thing.
Absolutely. And I think that, which then makes me the only person, the moderator of this lovely panel, the only self-diagnosed person here. Woo, release the confetti. Um, and like you all have said, it's something I have,
I'm also
thought about.
self-diagnosed. I'm also self-discovered. Yeah. I'm also self-discovered. Yeah.
It's an even split. And it is something to consider because also you can't move to some countries if you have an autism diagnosis. And it's like, oh, why is that still there? Why is that a law? What? Like I remember looking that up and I was like, oh, well, all right. So, self-diagnosis is 100% valid, and there's things to consider from a lot of different angles, not even just moving to other countries, living in America with a diagnosis. That's all we'll say about that. Ugh, rough
I
day.
would add also that most countries don't want disabled people in general. So most other countries, no
Absolutely.
matter where you are, if you want to move to another country for even for a short time, they don't want you in general. So I think it goes beyond just being autistic. If you're have any other kind of disability, and as we all know, with autistic, diagnoses comes chronic illnesses and other comorbid things. So basically you're screwed no matter what. I just had to bring that up.
No, it's an absolutely valid point. And unironically, I love that this panel is turned into a bit of a mix of talking about autism and talking about disability. Um, because it comes up. Um, but for our next question, and we have talked about this a little bit already in this panel, so there might not be too much discussion about it, but just in case anything new has come to mind as we've talked about other topics, what would each of you consider is the line between representation and using stereotypes?
That one is so tricky. I was like, how very dare you ask such a good question? Um, I often put on social media, or every so often I put on social media, just because someone's autistic doesn't mean they like trains. And then I'll write, but I love trains because trains are awesome. And why wouldn't you like trains? I really do love trains. It is tricky because like traits might seem stereotypical if they're common enough traits. So I guess it's such a nuanced thing. I feel maybe you balance it with, again, diversity in other ways, diversity in personality, diversity in other kind of demographics, right? Or how are these common traits dealt with the different autistic characters, right? We might not even we might not even express our traits the same way, even if they are similar traits. But yeah, that is That's a good question. I guess the bottom line is just remember to fully flesh out the character so that they're even more than just these traits or what seems like tropes in that. I'm very curious to hear what my fellow panelists have to say so I can learn from them.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there. It's about the depth of the character as a whole. You know, the stereotypes, I think stereotypes exist for a reason because those traits do tend to cluster, and so many of us can agree with that so many of those things. But it's about the other places where you're writing the character, and the other ways that you're representing the character. Does the character seem like a fully formed, fully fleshed out human in all ways and not just in the representation of the autism? Or have you created, a manic pixie dream girl of autistic superpowers? It's all about how much of the humanity you are willing to write, and that representation that you're willing to have there. We don't have like a Bechdel test for autism, but we need it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ace and Kat both that like it's I think it's a fine line, but it's also like how the representation is portrayed and how we're getting there and how is it subtle, is it overt, is it like what are you doing to make sure the representation, you know, isn't isn't a stereotype, but the stereotypes that are there, like how can we learn from them to not make, once you know what a stereotype is for disability and for autism more specifically, how can you diverge from that and make it a more authentic portrayal of representation and more, more heartfelt and more like not inspiration porn, but more three-dimensional. And I think that goes back to the other, answering the other questions we did previously of like, who are you consulting? Like if you're not autistic yourself, who are you consulting? Who are the kinds of people that you're consulting? Or what kind of research are you doing to making sure that those representations are valid and they don't fall flat?
I was thinking about it too. I was like, yeah, I like trains like to some extent, in a smaller extent. I wouldn't say that's like my thing. It's funny because I was just talking to my sibling about it, about stuff we used to talk about while getting MRIs done. It's like, oh no, I'm thinking about mummification. I'm thinking about Egypt, thinking about quasars. It's like you need to make a well-rounded person. Like my uncle's not into trains, but he loves building like model planes. Like he has so many in his entire garage just filled with planes, and some of them are RC planes. And I think he finally has a few trains, but he mostly had like helicopters and stuff. And I was just like, Uncle, why do you have this? And he's like, I like making them. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know. As a kid, I was like, that's an option. You can just spend your adult money on toys. Mommy says I have to spend it on clothes and sensible things. But it was cool. For our next question, we talked about this a little bit before as well, but I wanted to see if anyone wanted to go a bit deeper on the subject. So, what methods can be used to ensure strong representation? And I know Kat talked a little bit about, talking to autistic organizations and reaching out to, and all of you have talked about, get a sensitivity reader, consultant, cultural consultant, talk to autistic people, but other methods.
I mean, I think we live in such a world of so much media. We have the ability to go down autistic talk and to see so many of the people who are living their lives and will answer questions. You have the ability to hop over on YouTube and to see long and short form essays. You have the ability to go over onto Instagram. There honestly are so many autistic people talking about their life experiences that at this point, if you're not using those resources, I think that priority should absolutely be having somebody look at your manuscript who is actually autistic and who is doing that work as a sensitivity reader. But at bare minimum, like please use the internet that we have to do the work it's there. It's really not as hard as I think anybody makes it out to be. It's there. It exists.
Yeah, I think especially for autism, and I think this is what helped me, come to terms with, getting a diagnosis and being self-diagnosed was going to social media and still going to social media and looking at TikTok and looking at YouTube and following people who are talking about their own lived experience because that's what's real. Like, and it's not like, yeah, it's not getting like a sensitivity reader, which is what, many of us do here, but it is a starting point for you can hear people from different experiences and different walks of life and different geographical areas talk about or you know uh yeah, just talk about their experiences or post about different things that they're doing. And that's really, really important. Besides, reaching out to autistic-led organizations and consulting sensitivity readers and stuff, but like the media is there. Like that's why content creators are putting up that kind of information is because they want people to learn from them and to know, like, even though their experience is just one experience, it's still part of like a bigger conversation.
I think what I want to add is not a challenge, but an invitation. Write yourself on the page. If you are wrestling with, well, I don't know if, people would like a protagonist who's like me, but you know what? Put it on the page. I'm extending an invitation to you to represent yourself because you do not know how you will move someone with the characters that you write. And I've had to say that even as an anthology editor, I edited 2 anthologies of disability representation, and people were saying, this is who I am when they were querying us. And but I don't know if I really should put myself on the page. Put yourself on the page. Say Cait Gordon told me to do this if you want somebody to blame.
100%. And to sort of yes and that, if the idea of, putting yourself on the page in an original setting is too daunting, do what teenager Basil did and start writing fanfics. Put all the traits that you think are, that are a part of you, put them on a character. Make Vegeta autistic. I was gonna say make Chowder autistic, but that child is autistic. That is an autistic child that likes to eat food, which I love that show. I'm sorry. But that actually brings us to the final question for this panel and dovetails perfectly, which I swear as I was talking about it was not intentional, but it's lovely when things work out that way. So for our panelists, who is your favorite autistic or autistic coded character in media?
I am embarrassingly very late to this party, but I'm reading the Murderbot books right now, and I feel so deeply seen by Murderbot in so many ways.
Okay, is it okay if I really like the autistic characters that I write?
Hell yeah.
If your own characters aren't your favorites, I really don't know what to say. No, in Iris and the crew, I have 2 characters, a man and a little girl who actually represent kind of different sides to me as an autistic person. And one is verbally speaking, and the other one is selectively non-speaking. She signs most of the time. And when she feels like it, she talks, because that's what I would have loved as a kid. I would have loved to have been able to use ASL. I like quiet communication. But there is a story in the Nothing Without Us 2 anthology. Now I want to get the name right. I always get this name wrong, and that's bad cat as an editor. It's Meg Candelaria. they wrote a story called Saving the World at the Bat at a Heck Mart about someone who works at a convenience store, and a vampire comes in and he wants to enthrall this person. And she's just trying to remember the neurotypical rules of making eye contact and stuff. So the vampire thinks that they're enthralling the young girl, and the young girl is like the teenage girl or a late teen girl is just staring back like, okay, I'm just going to keep this up because I've been told you got to make eye contact. Well, whenever this vampire enthralls someone, he loses track of time. The teenage girl does not stop looking at him, and then dawn happens and he dies. I just, the co-editor Tally C. Johnson and I, we were in stitches, and the snark and this of this character, and I think the last line is neurotypicals are so weird, but she becomes this savior because she slaughtered a vampire just by maintaining eye contact till dawn. So stuff like that just brings me joy. Like I said, humor is awesome.
I have a couple favorite characters that I could think of. I mean, I'm sure I'll have more, but one is I read a very early draft of the book Hollow. It's a young adult horror. It comes out September 30th, 2025, by Taylor Groff. They're an autistic author, and I read an early draft of their book. And that was like one of the first times, like, I didn't have an autism diagnosis when I read the early draft of the book, and I was like seeing so much of myself in Cassie, and it was really great. So I really enjoy that character in that book, and please pre-order it because it helps authors, helps autistic authors. And the book is called Hollow by Taylor Groff. And then two other ones. One is from the TV show Everything's Gonna Be Okay. That was on Freeform. And it has a lot of like autistic characters and disabled characters in general, but it has like two autistic characters, and one of them has a service dog, which is really cool to see. And they're like a queer couple, and they're ace too, which is amazing. So both
It was so good.
yeah, it's so good. Like both characters are so good, and I just love that representation. It's such a good show. And then the other one is more of an autistic coded character. So it's my absolute favorite show. And it is like a special interest of mine, is the TV series True Calling that came out right after Buffy ended. Stars Eliza Dushku and Jason Priestley. And the character that I think is autistic coded is played by Zach Galifianakis in a dramatic role. He's not like, this is like one of his only dramatic roles. He hated the show, but the character that he plays like a morgue, the character's boss at the morgue, and he's just. I was rewatching True Calling like a few months ago, and I was texting friends going like, "Oh my god, this character's so autistic coded," because they wrote him as like, "Oh, he's socially awkward," right? But like, he's so autistic coded, and then I like had gone on Tumblr, and okay, I'm not the only one that says it, because like people on Tumblr were picking up on it. I'm like, okay, good. I'm not the only person that, sees that in that character, because he's just a very awkward, bumbling character, but like not necessarily in a bad way. But yeah, it's my favorite TV show, and like why I wanted to be a TV writer, but also piggybacking off of Basil's comment about fanfic, which is I wrote my first disabled character in fanfic in like 2007, and that was why I started writing like disabled characters. And I remember the comments are still up there, by the way, they're still on fanfic.net, but I remember some people commenting like that it was their first time, or like early times of seeing a disabled character like in the story, and they were like, oh, I hadn't thought about it in that way. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I just started incorporating more disabled characters. And now, I'm writing like more autistic characters, but before it was more like characters with cerebral palsy and other disabilities. But like that's fanfic is where it started for me, as it starts for many queer people and many, disabled people. But it's in this very small niche fandom for a show that no one remembers. But those are some of my favorite examples of autistic coded, like autistic representation or autistic coded representation.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. We got a lot of good examples of representation, everyone's favorites. I mentioned mine earlier, being like Entrapta, who's autistic coded. Of course, I have seen media with autistic people, but you know how it is when you think about a question, it's like, oh yeah, I know the answer, and your brain's like, no, you don't. So, when this gets aired, I'll be in the Discord server and someone can ask me then, and maybe I'll remember by the time June comes around. But we have reached the end of our panel. So at this time, panelists, if you would like to give any final thoughts or farewells, or if there's something you'd like to promote, a project, a book, or direct people to your website, we'll go ahead and do that. As the moderator, I don't have anything to promote. I'm sure someone will find me on social media. They always do. That's fine. But we'll go ahead and get it started with Ace.
My dead name used to be in the middle of the alphabet and it was much easier. I was never at the beginning of these things. You can find me at stayweirdbekind.com. I'm all over the internet as Mortuary Report, MORTUARY Report, because I used to be a mortician. Or you can just Google my name. I'm there. The only place I'm not is on Twitter because that place is the devil's playground. I'm not working on anything specific right now, but I'm around. I'm around.
Hi. You can, okay. So what I was gonna say was hire autistic people, hire them in your writers' rooms and in publishing, and buy, books by autistic people and media, and support us because we need it, especially now. And I think a lot of autistic people and disabled people in general, work freelance and don't, or, have, other sources of income where they don't have, full-time jobs or whatever. So it's important to like support them via, books or media or things that they're putting out or Patreon or whatever. So please support like any of your favorite authors or creators who might be autistic or think are autistic, and to engage in that kind of representation. You could find me at True Cherry Girl. That's TRU Cherry Girl across all the social medias. Yes, it's because I'm a True Calling fan, because it's TRU Cherry Girl. And then so it's I'm still on Twitter, even though the place is a mess. Blue Sky, Instagram. I do keep most of it private, but feel free to request me. I think my Blue Sky is public. And it's not for any reason other than like I don't want to be harassed. But if you're a writer or something, please, request me and I'll follow you back. And then you can find the anthology that I'm in, Being Ace, on any book retailer. We got a Lambda Literary Award last year. We were nominated for a Lambda Literary Award last year, and it's across any book retailer. So bookshop, any indie bookstore. The only thing you can afford is Amazon, that's okay. Barnes and Noble, like any book retailer. And then I have some classes that I'm teaching. I think you can find if you just look up my name and Women on Writing. I'll be teaching a disability and fiction class around the time this goes live. So sometime in July, I'm teaching a disability and fiction class online for Women on Writing. So please feel free to sign up if you're a disabled writer, because I would love to have you. And I may be teaching other classes with them in the future. And then I also do sensitivity reading and you can find more information about that through the Women on Writing platform. If you just look up Women on Writing and my name, it'll a sensitivity reading thing will come up. Because I don't have a website yet, but hopefully someday. And that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I'm going to be following people. I had a great time. The little book on my background is season 1, Iris and the Crew Tear Through Space. Fun fact, won the 2023 Indie Ink Award for Disability Representation by a Disabled Author. And I am so proud of that award, and Write Hive and Inked and Grey Press and Indie Story Greek, you're all awesome. Iris and the Crew is my dream space, inspired by universal design and the social model of disability, but in space with some pew 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 adventures. The ship is massively accessible. It's a big ship, so I'm sure there's people who aren't disabled on it, but you won't find them in the principal cast. The other book that I forgot to mention, which is not my book, but the author we called me the book auntie because I was editor on it. It's Spaced by C.L. Carey, and it's a young adult work of fiction that's just been nominated for a Prix Aurora Award. And the lead character, the Martian, is so relatable if you're autistic. So I highly recommend Spaced. And the very last thing I would ask folks to look out for, because Talia C. Johnson and I are both autistic, as the Nothing Without Us 2 anthology and the Nothing Without Us anthology. They have such a wonderful cast of lived experience authors. And if you want to learn more about me, I'm at caitgordon.com. So that's CAIT because it's Irish. CAITGORDON.com. And I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram at CAITG author. So Cat G author.
And once again, I just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us here today and for taking part in this discussion for Autism Rep in the writing industry. And I hope everyone is enjoying the conference and having a great time. And we'll see you on the Discord. Bye, everyone.